Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching a video called Basic Networking Fundamentals. In this video, we are going to go over some of the absolute high-level basics of what you need to know about networks and networking from a very general point of view. We're going to start off by, well, quite frankly, answering the question, what is a network? If you don't know what a network is, well, then you're not going to be able to go on to become a networking specialist. After that, we'll take a look at some of the different types of networks, like client-server, peer-to-peer, and LANs, CANs, MANs, and WANs. Then we'll see how we actually make connections. We'll take a look at something called media, which is used to connect networks. We'll take a look at something called a protocol. We'll see what that is. And then we'll wrap things up by giving you a high-level overview to the concept of addressing. So first of all, what is a network? Well, the definition of a network is real simple. A network is created when you have two or more hosts connected together so they can communicate and share resources. That's right. All you need is two hosts and you have a network. Now, that word host might be confusing you, but a host can be pretty much any device that has a network interface, which allows it to connect to other devices on a network. Now, to keep this real simple, just think of a host as a computer. Now, it doesn't have to be a computer. It can be a hub, a switch, routers, all sorts of different things that it can be. But to keep it simple, we'll just say computer. So a network is created when you have two, that's it, just two computers connected together so that they can communicate, right? They can talk to each other and share resources. Now, when we say resources, some examples of resources might be documents or printers. Matter of fact, you may have even heard of something on a network called a file and print server. Well, that's exactly what that particular computer is. It's a computer that shares files or documents and printers. So, let me give you one piece of advice that I've given to many students over the years, and that is if you are looking to gain some experience, if you're looking to get into this industry and you want to gain some experience with networking, well, get your hands on two computers. That's it, just two computers. They don't have to be expensive computers. They can be inexpensive, older computers. Make sure they both have a network interface on them, a network card as it's more commonly known. Get a cable to connect the two of them together. Get them talking to one another. Share resources from one to the other. And you have built a network. Now, you might be thinking, whoa, slow down, Ed. I'm about 2 minutes into this video, and you're already telling me, oh, bing, bang, boom, just take these two computers and hook them up and you're good to go. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying once you've gone through the rest of this course and you understand how to do that, in order to gain some experience, all you have to do is get two computers, put together a network, and you've got experience. Now, let's take a look at some of the different types of networks, some of the different classifications of networks that we have out there. Now, one of them is called client-server. Now, in a client-server network environment, each host, there's that word host again, we can just interchange that with computer to keep it simple. Each computer will act specifically as either a server or a client. And you'll notice here the word or. That's going to be significant in just a moment. Okay, so what we mean here is that each computer is going to be either a server or a client. Now, the servers, like we have here, are the computers that share the resources or make the resources available to others, or we could say serve the resources. Thus the name server, right? Because we're serving the resources. The clients, as we have over here, are the recipient or the receiver of these resources. Okay, and so what's happening here is we have, in this drawing, one server who has all the resources, shares them so that these 3 clients can then receive them as needed. Now, this is probably your most typical network environment. If you can think of different places you've been, maybe different places you've worked, where you have computers that talk to each other, you'll notice that usually the end users, the employees of the company will sit at the client computers, but yet as part of their duty, they access certain resources, and those resources all come from servers, very often sitting in a server room or the computer room, right? So this should look somewhat familiar. Now, another type of network that we have is something called peer-to-peer. Now, unlike what we were just talking about with the client-server network, you don't see peer-to-peer networks all that often. See, in peer-to-peer networks, every host or computer will act as both a client and a server. So here, even though you see what looks like 2 computers here, this is just a visual representation of one computer acting as both a server and a client. And you'll notice that all 3 computers on our network are both servers and clients. And what I mean by that is each computer will have resources that other computers on the network may want to access, while at the same time each computer will access other computers' resources. Now, in a peer-to-peer network, each computer is administrated in place. In other words, you're going to have an administrator on each one of these machines because they're all responsible for serving resources to other computers. So peer-to-peer networks need to be in your very small home office type environments. It has always been said in all the years that I've been teaching this stuff that a peer-to-peer network really should be a network of 10 computers or less, because the idea is once you get over 10 computers, there's just no way to have each one administrated separately. Well, the reality is that you don't even find too many 8, 9, or 10 computer peer-to-peer networks. Matter of fact, very often you don't even see 3 computer peer-to-peer networks. I know that at my house, okay, in my home office, I have a client-server environment. I have one computer which has all the resources. My printers are hooked up to that one computer, and the main source of any files that would be shared around the network are all hosted by that one computer, thus making that computer the server, and all my other computers, the ones that my wife uses and my kids use, well, those are all clients. Okay, so just to review, client-server, you have each computer acting as specifically a server or specifically a client. And in a peer-to-peer network, each computer is acting as both a client and a server simultaneously. And again, that's why I emphasize the word or, because now we have the word and. Okay, and that's the key word to remember to be able to differentiate between the two. Alright, now let's move into this whole LANs, CANs, MANs, and WANs. First of all, LAN. LAN stands for Local Area Network. Now, it typically will refer to a network contained within a building. And that's what we have here, right? We have our building, and inside our building, here is our network. And you can see that we have a couple of servers on our network and a few clients on our network. And by the way, let me just point out right now, throughout this entire course, anytime you see this picture right here, I'm representing a server with that. And anytime you see this picture right here, okay, that's representative of a client, just so that you understand any diagrams that I use throughout this course. Now, I said that a LAN is typically a network contained within a building, or localized within a building, right? Thus the name Local Area Network. But there are different definitions of exactly what a LAN is. Depending on who you ask and how long they've been in this business, they might give you a slightly different answer. As a for instance, one definition of a LAN that I've heard of is any network that is connected using your own media or your own cabling, meaning, again, it would kind of be like in a building. Okay, if you're in the building, you're using your own cabling, so it's a local area network. But as soon as you go to the phone company, let's say, and get some form of external communication using a third-party source, you're no longer part of a LAN. Okay, maybe yes, maybe no. I've heard of a LAN being one floor within one building. Okay. I've heard of a LAN being one side of a router. All right, maybe. So there are many different definitions, but the bottom line is a LAN is going to be a bunch of computers that are very close together, connected over a high-speed connection, typically within a building. Now, once we leave our LAN, most people will tell you that you've gone into a WAN. But wait, I don't have WAN coming up next year. Matter of fact, we have a couple of others we're going to talk about first, the CAN and the MAN. Well, yes, it is true that typically you're only going to hear about LANs and WANs, but just to give you a bit of an overall understanding of where some of this stuff came from, I want to go over CANs and MANs, which is these are kind of outdated terms we don't use much anymore, but just in case you run into them, let's talk about them here. Now, CAN is a campus area network. And this basically means that you have a network spread between multiple contiguous buildings. So first of all, we have multiple buildings, right? Here you can see that we have more than one building, so in theory, by the typical definition, we're no longer in a LAN, right? It's no longer a local area network. But if these buildings are contiguous, meaning nothing else in between, right? They're all next to each other, and very often they will be on a single property, then it's considered to be part of a campus area network. Now, if you think about where you've seen a network like this, where you have multiple buildings on a single property, very often the first place you think of is a school, right? Like maybe like a college even. Well, when you say the name campus, what do you think of? Well, you think of very often a college campus, or maybe even a business campus. If you've ever heard of a business campus, well, that's the same thing. A business campus is a bunch of buildings on a single property instead of just all being contained in one building. Now, if we move away from the CAN, or the campus area network, we move into the MAN, which stands for Metropolitan Area Network. And this is a network spread between multiple non-contiguous buildings, but we stay within a single metropolitan area. So down here you'll see that I have a nice photograph of a beautiful metropolitan area. You know what city that is? Yep, that's Chicago. So if we were to say within the city of Chicago, maybe the company resides in 3 different buildings. So if we were to pick this building, and they're in this building, and they're in this building, but they're not contiguous, meaning they're spread out all around the city, well, then that would be part of a metropolitan area network. Now, the other definition that I can tell you that comes with metropolitan area network, there's a definition that says within 100 kilometer radius. Okay, maybe. Although different cities, depending on the size of the city, have different metropolitan areas that go along with that city. Now, where this type of network originated from, it had to do with back in the days when networks would be connected to each other via regular telephone line. Right? We would use something called a modem, and we would actually dial from one office to the other. Well, back in those days, we had to worry about local calling versus long distance calling. And so very often the metropolitan area network would be a network contained within a local calling area. But anyway, however you want to look at it, this is a metropolitan area network. Now from there, we move on over to the WAN. And I will tell you, before we get into the specific definition of a WAN here, I will tell you that many people these days will consider this right here, this campus area network, they'll consider this a WAN. And this metropolitan area network, they'll consider that a WAN. Meaning, these days, pretty much anything that goes outside of a building is commonly referred to as a WAN. But WAN stands for Wide Area Network. And it means just that. It's a network spread over a wide area, typically covering multiple cities and possibly countries. But as I mentioned a moment ago, it could be even within a single campus or a single metropolitan area. So here you can see that we have a company that has 5 different offices, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 offices spread out around the United States, and you'll notice that there is a line of communication going from each office to all other offices. So it's really kind of all one big network spread out, and therefore it is a WAN, a wide area network. Alright, so now that you know what a network is, and you know some of the different types of networks that are out there, well, how do we actually make these computers become a network? Right? I said you got to have 2 or more hosts or computers that have a network interface and communicate with each other. Well, how do they communicate? Well, they communicate by sending bits of information across something called network media. Now, the media that we're referring to here can be either wire media, like we have up in our little picture right here, right? Could be either a bunch of cables, or it could be wireless. Okay, so you might be connecting through the airwaves. Now, some examples of wired media would be copper and fiber optic. And we're going to get into that in great detail in the next video. We're going to talk about network media. Some of the examples of wireless would be either RF for radio frequency and infrared, like you see on a remote control. Well, believe it or not, that same technology that we've used for many years in our remote controls on our televisions, we also can use to allow hosts or computers to communicate. And as I mentioned, we will discuss all the different forms of media in much more detail later in this course. The actual wired media we'll get to in the next video, and wireless we'll talk about later on. But for right now, I just want you to understand the general concept of there being something called media to make connectivity between our network hosts. Okay, now, what is a protocol? You've probably heard of that word before. Many people have. They've heard of these network protocols, computer protocols. What the heck does this mean? Well, the definition of a protocol is that it is a set of rules and procedures for communication. Or a network protocol would be a set of rules and procedures for network communication. Now, in order for hosts to communicate on a network, they must agree to use a common set of rules and procedures. In other words, they have to have the same set of rules and procedures or the same network protocol. They have to use the same network protocol. So if one computer is set to use one protocol and another computer is set to use another protocol, they're not going to talk to each other. They have to agree upon the same set of rules and procedures in order to communicate. You might be able to relate with this. It's kind of like if you were to go to a foreign country. If you don't understand that country's language, or even, it kind of even goes beyond just the language. But let's start with language. If you don't understand the language that the people are speaking in that other country, well, then you're not going to be able to communicate with the people in that country. Now, the reason I say it actually goes a step further, and I don't like to completely analogize this with language, is, again, as you might actually be familiar with, if you just speak the language of that other country. So maybe you just went out and learned how to translate your own language into that other country's language, but you don't really understand the overall customs and procedures as it might be, then you're still not going to communicate effectively. You may say something that literally seems to match with the way you're trying to say it in your own language, well, but it might not have all the same meaning if you don't really understand all the customs and traditions of that country. Okay, so that's what a protocol is in networking. Now, some of the common network protocols used today are something called TCP/IP, and that is probably the number one. As a matter of fact, not even probably, I'll say definitely the most common network protocol used today, because without TCP/IP, we don't have the internet. Ever heard of that, the internet? Yeah, I thought so. So we will talk about TCP/IP in great detail again in another video later on in the course. Some of the other common network protocols out there are IPX/SPX, something called NetBEUI, and AppleTalk. Now, those three protocols are all what's called vendor-specific protocols. So IPX/SPX was created by Novell, NetBEUI was created by Microsoft, and AppleTalk, well, you can probably guess who that was created by. It's right in the name. It was created by AppleTalk. And in order to use those protocols, you would actually have to pay a fee or pay royalties to those individual companies to utilize those protocols. TCP/IP, on the other hand, is what's known as an open standard protocol, meaning it is not owned by any one company and can be used freely by anybody. So for right now, if you're feeling at all confused, I'm going to keep it real simple. I just want you to know what a protocol is. It's a set of rules and procedures for communication. So when you hear that word, that's what it means. All right. Now, to wrap things up here, I want to give you a high-level understanding of the concept of addressing. All hosts on a network must be identified with an address on that network. Okay, that's the concept right there. You have to have some kind of identification, some kind of addressing in order to be able to have network communication. Matter of fact, this is very similar to how addressing would work either through the postal network or the telephone network, right? In order to mail a letter, well, you have to address it, right? The recipient of that letter must have an address in order for the postal network to know where to bring it. And the telephone network, well, if you want to call somebody, you have to know their phone number. If you don't know their phone number, well, how does the telephone network know how to route your call to the appropriate phone? Well, the same thing holds true in computer networks. Every host on the network must have an address. Now, the most typical types of addresses used in computer networking are something called a MAC address and IP address. Now, we will get into both MAC and IP addressing in great detail again later on in the course. Right now, I just want you to understand the idea that every host on a network must have an address. Now, the one last thing here is that there are both what's called private and public forms of addressing. Private addressing is the type of addressing that would be used to keep communication safe within the boundaries of a private, secure network. So when we talk about IP addressing later on, you will see that we will talk about private IP addresses and public IP addresses. Well, the private IP addresses are ones that cannot be used outside your own private network, whereas public addresses are the type that are used to allow communication with the outside world, the unsecure outside world, otherwise known as the internet. Okay, so public addresses are used to communicate with the public out on the internet, and private addresses are used within your own private network. All right, well, I think you now have the foundation needed to go through the rest of this course. You know exactly what a network is, and remember, how many computers do you need to make a network? That's right, you need 2. That's it. Now, it's 2 or more, so don't think that all networks are just 2 computers. No, many networks are 200 or 2,000 or maybe 2 million computers. but a network starts with two computers talking to each other and sharing resources. We saw that there are different types of networks. We have client-server, where one computer acts as a server, another acts as a client, or again, that would be in your two-computer network, but each computer will be either a server providing the resources or the client receiving the resources. Then we have our peer-to-peer networks, which we don't see very often, and the reason why is because every computer is a client and server, which means every computer needs to have its own separate administration. We talked about LANs, CANs, MANs, and WANs, and of course the reality is you need to be familiar with LANs and WANs, local area network, typically within a building, wide area network, typically outside that building. We talked about network media, the way we communicate, and protocols, the rules for communication. And we now understand that all computers on a network must have an address so that we can figure out how to get data from point A to point B. Alright, well that's all I got for you in this video. I will see you in the next video.